Hello and welcome to Booklust. I'm Nancy Pearl. My guest today is Erika Swyler, and we'll be talking about her brand new novel, We Lived on the Horizon. Erika, it's just a pleasure to talk to you. I loved this novel. Where I know that you write speculative fiction, or do you prefer just science fiction? How do you define what you write?
It's kind of difficult. So this book, I guess I would call speculative fiction, though some folks are calling it sci-fi. I kind of don't define what I write because I don't really know what I'm writing until I'm in the middle of it. I'm an omnivorous reader, and I think that comes out in the writings. There's a lot of, there's elements of mystery in here, a little bit of romance, a little bit of horror, and a lot of science fiction. So it's that mix. So I guess speculative.
Did you read science fiction, fantasy as a child, and did you come into this naturally, one might say?
So again, as a child, I was an omnivorous reader. So my parents sort of let me free roam in their bookshelves. So there was a lot of science fiction in there. There was a lot of Bradbury and Asimov and all of that golden age sort of stuff that my father had collected. So that was my first real introduction to it. And I think I just remember the other day when as a child, my mom read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy to my sister and me. And I think she got really bored with children's literature at the time and decided to read something she thought was going to be fun for her. And so, that's really entwined in my understanding of books and literature, is that fun sort of science fiction feel to it. But I was also taking in a lot of other literary fiction, things like way above my reading comprehension at the time, missing the entire point of things, but just having a good time accessing all sorts of books.
There is something to be said for that kind of reading freely and just experiencing. Yeah,
Yeah, I really think so. I know there's a real movement to keep, children's books for children, adult books for adults. But the great thing about being kids is you don't get what you're not supposed to get. It just
exactly.
goes right over your head. And, when you access these other books, you just get a whole idea that there is just a big grown up, exciting world. And, you start to read up towards it. And I think it winds up being good for your development. So I loved having access to all of those books. I think it made me a better reader and eventually a better writer.
I think that what you said is something I've always believed. And I was a children's librarian in the early years of my career. But it's that children get exactly what their level is in a book. And they skip pages if they don't understand it. And that's kind of great, reassuring.
When something clicks years later, it becomes this funny moment of realization. Oh, I entirely missed that whole point, and now here it is, and I
Right.
understand this book more. It lets you rediscover things. So I'm a huge fan of just letting kids graze as far as they read.
And I feel the same way about adult reading too, that we we kind of head to a bookstore or a library with a book or two in mind. But I remember just wonderful days of browsing the library shelves, just looking for a title that jumps out at me or something like that. Is that the kind of reader you are?
Oh, absolutely. I spent much of my high school years after school. I would just go to the library. There are times when you feel like, oh, I just don't want to go home. I can't go home. So I would go to the library. And I just remember reading just stacks and stacks of books that, I wasn't even taking them out. I was just sitting there reading the whole book and putting it right back. And I think I
Right.
went through an entire contemporary fiction rack one summer, and it just felt like total freedom. So when people say, "Oh, have you read this? Have you read this?" Probably it was all jammed in there at one point in time.
Right.
And I think that makes for interesting brains, and it makes for just a lot of discovery. And so I find it a little bit, I find genre and designations like that a little bit difficult because to me, it's all one story in the sense that this is what being human is, this is what people are. So why are we breaking these things into groups? And I think that kind of looking for one or two books or having a certain flavor of thing in mind winds up being really limiting as far as just your experience of books and your experience of the world. So I'm a huge fan of just pick it up, whatever it is.
Yeah, I always wished that somebody would give me a library and let me arrange it exactly the way I wanted. So put, cookbooks with cooking memoirs and cooking novels where the main character, or have your book, We Lived on the Horizon, next to books about other fiction that has AI and robots, but nonfiction as well, because I think we look for the same thing in fiction as we do in nonfiction as we do in fiction.
I think so. I think also when you're writing fiction, nonfiction is feeding into it. The world is feeding into it.
Yes.
And I mean, hopefully one wants people making sciences, writing a nonfiction to also be taking in the art of fiction to feed that as well. They should all be in communication. So I think when we separate them, that makes that communication a little bit more difficult. So, I mean, this book came out of a lot of fiction and it came out of a lot of nonfiction as well, and a lot of just what's going on in the world. So it would be nice if we could arrange things in books that are in dialogue with other books, but that becomes a little
Yeah.
more difficult when you're, searching for a specific title.
What? Oh, that's a great way of arranging books. So what books? So here's what I thought when I was reading We Lived on the Horizon. I thought it was in dialogue. I love that, Erica. I love that idea of books. I thought it was in a dialogue with Isaac Asimov, and the whole notion of the three laws of robotics. And I wanted to, I happen to have them right here. A robot cannot harm a human or allow a human to come to harm. A robot must obey human orders unless those orders conflict with the first law. A robot must protect itself unless that protection conflicts with the first or second law. And I'm not saying that that's how you develop Nix, or who is the AI, the robot in We Lived on the Horizon. But it seemed to me that underlays so much of all writing that we do about, especially fiction, that we do about AI and robots.
Very
What
much
do you
so.
think?
I think if you're writing anything in the science fiction realm that is dealing with a robot or an AI, it's impossible to avoid Asimov. That's sort of what
Yeah,
everything is built off of.
yeah.
So I wanted to take that because in going back and rereading Asimov, stuff I loved as a kid, but didn't really have the power to see where I fit in it at the time, I felt like it wasn't really welcoming for people like me, perspectives like mine, or perspectives too far outside of Asimov's own. I'll put it that way. So I wanted to really focus on, well, what do I do to, you know, um, complicate those laws? Those first two laws contradict each other.
Right.
And so what do we do in that contradiction? What do we do if we're thinking about making technology that really is capable of altruism and from a human perspective, from a planet perspective? What does that look like? And what does it do when it runs up against the problem that is humanity? Because we as humans are not terribly altruistic about ourselves a lot of times.
Right.
So, having these laws that are sort of in conflict is a real place to build from. And so that was what I took from Asimov. And it's also in dialogue with a lot of Ursula K. Le Guin books, The Dispossessed and Left Hand of
Yeah.
Darkness specifically. So I was thinking Le Guin is great for, societal systems, political systems, and the idea of, well, how do these go right and how do these go wrong? So I really wanted to jam those two things together and see what happens. And it became a place where I felt like I could really play and find a lot of moral and ethical difficulties, but also explore a lot of questions that I was having about the world at the time when I started writing it. And so it just kind of grew from there, larger than what I read as a kid and larger conceptually than anything I'd written before, which is kind of scary,
Hmm.
but also a real joy to lean into.
I'm so glad that you mentioned The Dispossessed. People, when they talk about the adult Le Guin, they at fiction, they always talk about The Left Hand of Darkness. But I always found The Dispossessed spoke to me much more because it was a utopian society. Oh, yeah. Oh, that makes me want to go home and reread it. Well, I haven't reread it in years.
It's delightful in the sense that it gets at what we're picking at today. How do we build something where we can act, where we take care of each other and have a thriving society? And is there a right answer to that? And it just falls into all of the pitfalls that humans always have. And it
Right.
just felt, really, I wouldn't want to say prescient because it's very this is history. This is
Yeah.
every time we try to build a new form of government, every time we start a new society. But she has it down so clearly. It just felt like it gave me permission to try it myself and see what I could do, especially in a time when people are saying we are in late stage capitalism and we should eat the rich. I said, okay, well, let's take that out of the equation. Let's take the money out and see what we can do from there. And do we still get to that place? So
Yeah.
it became a real door opener for me.
Uh-huh. In The Dispossessed, she somehow made anarchy a viable political system, which I thought was just an amazing accomplishment.
It was just
Yeah.
visionary and really bold. And I thought, this is what I like when sci-fi is working on all cylinders. That's what I love about it. It's just it's a playground of human ideas and what does and doesn't work and the very best of us, hopefully. So I think
Right.
Le Guin was really that for me. And yeah, it just became a canvas to play with.
Yeah. You're in We Lived on the Horizon centers on a city called Bulwark. Talk about Bulwark. I'll
Bulwark is a walled and wired city, as I want to explain it. When I was first looking for a place to set this city, I was thinking some sort of Badlands area of the US, just a jumping off point. It is an outpost for and sort of people who believe that they're the last people living on humanity after societal collapse, war, and natural disaster. So it is literally a bulwark against the rest of the world. And it becomes the system that values labor and what contributes to keeping people alive and society going that way. So all the work that goes into somebody getting an education is valued in what you would call life hours and things like that. This was my answer for what is an economy, because people get very upset when you don't have an economy in your fiction. So I said, well, this is a different economy, and we're going to try this sort of idea of utopia and see where the cracks happen. And in this walled and wired city, it monitors literally everything that a person does throughout their day. I found that people find this very upsetting. And folks don't necessarily realize that we're already doing that. And the leap that I've made with this city that's monitoring literally everything is just about two technological leaps away.
Yeah.
So it's far future, but not so far future. Everyone with a smart home might be a little bit uncomfortable after reading this.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the other aspects of Bulwark and this whole notion of giving hours for the greater good, right? That's how you would, is that there's a group of people who are body martyrs. And they are people who give up parts of their bodies, a leg, an eye, parts of their bodies so other people can live more fruitful lives.
Yeah.
That was painful to read.
It comes from a really good place, if this makes any sense.
Oh, no, no.
So,
I mean, it was
yeah.
painful to read because you did
No.
it so well.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yes.
No, it does. It comes from a really good place that's inherent in humanity. So that idea of the body murder came about. I was listening to a story on NPR, and they've run series on this a couple of times about people who do blind organ donations. Like they know someone out there needs a kidney. They don't know who. They sign up to go and donate an organ because this is a good thing that they can do. And this is known as a form of extreme altruism. But this exists in every time we form a society. there is someone out there who is thinking of the other before they're thinking of themselves. And it feels like a calling. And that's what ultimately keeps societies going. And unfortunately, governments have a real tendency to exploit this. We see it now a lot with mutual aid. Like when you look at things like the fires in California and people wanting to put, oh, there has to be conditions on whether or not we're going to give you aid. They can say that because they're assuming and they know that altruists and mutual aid and different NGOs and people really wanting to give will fill in those gaps. So you see that way that gets, exploited by governments just monetarily, effort-wise. It felt like I wanted to take that to its most extreme and say, okay, well, this is what happens with extreme altruists. And when something is rare and something is hard to get, it becomes incredibly valued, and that's when exploitation happens.
I know, having written a novel, I know writing is hard work. Was this a particularly difficult book for you to write, or was it worked out in your mind ahead of time? Very much worked out in your mind.
Well, I'm not a plotter, so nothing is ever fully worked out in my mind. I think this one was difficult because it has a unique voice that I'd never written in before. Nick's being an AI thinks differently. Their brain is arranged differently. They're used to being what I call a plural consciousness. So they are a we and a they in the sense that they are more than one. And trying to find that voice and have it be both approachable and relatable, but distinctly inhuman was a real hard trick for me to figure out. And that took a lot of time. I think I went through probably 3 drafts just to try to get what that voice was. And finding story is never linear for me. When I think of a book, it's just a giant knotted ball of yarn that has a color. And across the way, I will unravel and find out what it is that works there. So it's not the most efficient process. I would say from first thought, I'm usually thinking for almost 5 years before I sit down, and then I'm writing for around 5 years. So
Wow.
something
Wow.
has to live in the back of my mind, collecting things sort of like a magpie, and then a book comes.
Do you keep notes when you're thinking about in the back of your mind? Do you take those things out and put them down?
Yeah, I have a lot of notebooks. I work in a lot of different ways. I have a particular brand of notebook that I like. They're Apicas, and they're small, cheap, whatever, so that it doesn't feel precious to write in. Because I've learned that if something feels too nice, too important, I won't use it because this is just junk. So I can't put it down in this nice thing. So I
No,
have to
Erica, no,
have
Erica.
right? I have to have these little notebooks that I don't mind about, and I also work on the computer, and there are scraps and fragments all over the place. Half a scene here, half a scene there, and then I will eventually compile it all into a document that I start sliding around, and then I start churning through drafts, and that takes, that's the brunt of the work. But yeah, so I have notes all over the place. I know some people like to keep notes in their phones, but that's never been something I could possibly do. That just feels like it's a technology that doesn't need that part of my brain.
Uh-huh. When you got to a certain point, well, where did the main woman character come from?
Oh, I am really fortunate. And so I've spent a lot of time around older women, and they've just been incredible forces in my life. So I want to say that um, they're all just Enida is a combination of my mother, her friends, myself, and a bunch of elders I met, doing theater growing up. So just that whole kind of mash of everybody, and the way that you can be so determined in your sense of self as you get older. This is who I am, and it's not changing. But also realizing that, there is more out there, and perhaps you could have done things differently. So that kind of introspection and self-assuredness at the same time was something I really wanted to lean into.
Yeah, I think you just captured that perfectly, and with the two sainted women, and the sainted, like the body martyrs, but the sainted are the leading citizens in Bulwark whose lives were, pretty much, I think, destined from the fact that their ancestors created it, right? And
Yes.
so the comparison, I mean, you have the body martyrs and you have the sainted and you have Nyx, the sentient AI who looks human. I loved it.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I really wanted to play with a stratified system, like a class system, because that's what we're in at the moment. And the way class systems are only able to sustain themselves if you don't see the other classes at all. And this is what we're encountering now with, as far as consumer technology, consumerism in general, we don't see anybody on the other side. And it just creates not just a gap in wealth and a gap in lifestyle, it creates a gap in empathy and understanding. And it's not necessarily intentional. When people are born into a certain, class, that's just, this is what you know, how would you know otherwise? So I wanted to find, the shades of gray in between that and what happens when those divides start to get a little porous and people start to mingle.
Right.
And if we can all become better once those barriers are taken away. So that's sort of how this class system came about.
And we should make clear that the structure, that this is a fast-moving novel. A lot happens in this novel, and it's so thought-provoking and so, when I was reading it, I kept thinking, how did she come up with this? This notion. You're right, it is very Le Guinian, isn't it? It's lovely in that sense. I think she would be thrilled to have this book, because, yeah. So, Erika, are you already you're on a book tour right now as we're doing this, right?
I am. I'm currently in Providence, Rhode Island. I was just at the amazing Riff Raff books last night. They're the best. So yes, I am currently working on something else, but
Yes.
as you're doing the various things you need to do to get a book out in the world, that kind of takes a little bit of a backseat. But yeah, I'm working on another, I want to call it a world just next to ours, because that's how I let myself play. And it is about a dying diplomat and her aging daughters. So she considers herself to be the heart of the world. And so
Wow.
things go from there.
Yeah. Do you read China Mieville's books?
I do. I want to say the last one I read was Perdido Street Station, just for the massive world of it and the real, interesting cultures clashing and the fantasy element of
Yeah.
it. So
Yeah, I
it's
think that
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. I interrupted
Oh no,
you.
that complex kind of society and political machinations are real interesting to me. So
Right. Yes. And so maybe We Lived on the Horizon could be in dialogue with all those, literary, political novels as well. Yes, yes. Don't you think it definitely should be?
I think it's hard too because since it is a novel that moves, it's also, when I was writing it, I knew it was also very introspective. And so sometimes I think those things can clash, but I feel like in this case, my goal was to make the introspection part of the movement forward.
Yes.
So I'm hopeful that it reads as that, as much as it reads as, whew, gosh, this is a little bit of a political thriller.
And I think, honestly, I think you succeeded on all levels, and I'm so grateful to you for being on the show and taking time on this, on your book tour, and I look forward to the next book.
Oh, thank
you.
you so much. Thank you. This has been an absolute pleasure.